All right, guys, welcome to the show. I got an amazing one for you today. So I'm going to give you an empirical analysis that quantifies just how much U.S. media is biased in favor of Israel over Palestinians. Really incredible stuff here. Shout out to The Intercept and Adam Johnson and Ahmed Ali, who really did a great job breaking this down in detail. So we'll talk about that. Then we have the Hunter Biden circus comes to town. Wait until you hear what happened in Congress with Hunter Biden and the congressional Republicans. Then we'll get to the DNC is now in legal trouble over effectively trying to block the New Hampshire primary and pretend like it doesn't exist. Basically to say, what you guys do doesn't count because we're trying to rig it in favor of Biden, and he's not on the ballot there. Okay, so we'll talk about that. And then later on, we also have Nikki Haley making a fool of herself, Roger Stone plotting to do murder of Democratic politicians, and the Trump cultists target Jack Smith and Judge Tanya Chutkan. That's incredible stuff. So stay right there. By the way, everybody do me a big favor. Please subscribe to the channel. It helps out massively. It doesn't cost you anything at all. That button's below. Appreciate you very much for those of you who are clicking it. And if you're not, I don't know what you're doing with your life. Get it together. Okay, let's jump into it. So here we have a great piece in The Intercept. This is some real incredible stuff. I'm going to highly recommend you read the whole article. We're not going to read the whole article here, but this is very, very important for understanding the way Western media works and how they manufacture consent for their narrative and their preferred policy perspective. So here we have, the title is, Coverage of Gaza War in the New York Times and Other Major Newspapers Heavily Favored Israel, Analysis Shows. A quantitative analysis shows major newspapers skewed their coverage toward Israeli narratives in the first 6 weeks of the assault on Gaza. So they did a giant, academic, quantifiable analysis here, and they looked at the first 6 weeks of the war and the way the media discussed Israelis versus Palestinians. You're not going to be surprised at some of these findings, but the numbers really show you just how terrible the current situation is. So here's the disproportionate coverage chart. Mentions of Palestinians declined as the death toll mounted. Let me repeat that. Mentions of Palestinians declined as the death toll mounted. So now we have 28,000 dead Palestinian civilians. That's according to Euromed Monitor, the human rights group. We have 12,000 children dead from Euromed Monitor, the human rights group. And the more dead babies, dead women there were, dead innocent men there were, the less Palestinians were mentioned. So here you can see it. Mentions of Palestinians were highest early on, and then as the death toll mounted, the mentions of Palestinians goes down and down and down and down. So in other words, they are not reporting the story accurately. If you are, you would be bringing up the mounting death toll and talking about Palestinians on a daily basis, more so now than ever before. But they're not doing that. Here they say, this is incredible, slaughter of Israelis, not Palestinians. Highly emotive terms for the killing of civilians like slaughter, massacre, and horrific were reserved almost exclusively for Israelis who were killed by Palestinians rather than the other way around. Okay, here we go. Look at this chart, man. Look at this chart. So the LA Times, the New York Times, and the Washington Post. Now, by the way, let me just say up front, the print outlets are usually even better than the TV outlets. This is going to be better than CNN, MSNBC, Fox News, the nightly news. So in theory, these people should be the best at reporting the story. So again, between the LA Times, the New York Times, and the Washington Post, they use the word slaughter when discussing Israeli deaths 60 times. They only used it once when discussing Palestinian deaths at the hands of the IDF. The use of the word horrific. It was used to describe Israeli deaths 38 times. It was used to describe Palestinian deaths only 4 times. The use of the word massacre. This one's incredible. It was used to describe Israeli deaths 120 times. And it was used to describe Palestinian deaths only 4 times. So in other words, the emotive language and the intentionality is never assigned to Israelis killing Palestinians, but it is assigned to when Hamas kills Israelis. This is the way they rig the game with language. And oftentimes, I'm sure you guys have seen this, they'll use a very passive voice, very neutral, sterile language when talking about Palestinians being killed. A great example of this, everybody saw this, took off on Twitter quite a bit, is when they said, a blast killed 7 Palestinians. People were like, a blast? Yeah, what's the blast? The blast is an IDF airstrike that purposefully was taking out children. But it's a blast killed Palestinians. So look, this is incredible stuff here. One typical headline from the New York Times in a mid-November story about the October 7th attack reads, "They ran into a bomb shelter for safety. Instead, they were slaughtered." Compare this with the most sympathetic profile of Palestinian deaths in Gaza from November 18th. The war turns Gaza into a graveyard for children. Here, graveyard is a quote from the United Nations, and the killing itself is in a passive voice. In its own editorial voice, the Times story on deaths in Gaza uses no emotive terms comparable to the ones in its story about the October 7th attack. The Washington Post employed massacre several times in its reporting to describe October 7th. Quote, President Biden faces growing pressure from lawmakers in both parties to punish Iran after Hamas's massacre, one report from the Post says. A November 13th story from the paper about how Israel's siege and bombing had killed 1 in 200 Palestinians does not use the word massacre or slaughter once. The Palestinian dead have simply been killed or died, often in a passive voice. Give you a little bit more on this here, but again, I highly recommend you go and read the entire article. There's a lot of important facts in here. Only 2 headlines out of over 1,100 news articles in the study mention the word children related to Gazan children. Wow. So in other words, very sterile language, very clinical language when discussing Palestinians, always a passive voice as if there's no intentionality behind the killing of Palestinians. But for Israelis, load up the terminology, emotive language, talk about the intentionality and the purposeful nature of the killing of Israeli civilians, and this is how you rig the game. This is how you manufacture consent. So again, massive shout out here to Adam Johnson and Ahmed Ali, who did this piece. Look, it is not debatable. There is no debate. There is no discussion. There is no question. Western media, both print and TV, they are overwhelmingly biased in favor of Israel over Palestinians, and it has never been more proven and clear. Hey y'all, do me a favor and like and subscribe. It helps out big time in the algorithm. Click the bell as well for notifications when videos drop, and watch that video on screen right now. You know you want to.